We are talking about hangboard training today, and first I just want to say I'm really excited about this thunderstorm that's happening right now. There's been some rain while we've been here in Georgia, but not quite a thunderstorm yet, and it feels like really comforting in an interesting way. But yeah, we're talking all about hangboard training today, and one thing I want to talk about first before we really dive into protocols and things like that is just that we often kind of treat finger training as this really special different mode of training for climbing, but the truth is that we can apply a lot of just regular strength and conditioning principles to hangboarding, because really hangboarding is just strength training for your fingers. Of course, we care about the strength of our fingers because they are a connection point between us and the wall. So I want to talk a little bit about the different parts of the finger and arm, forearm, etc. So the fingers are going to be what has more of the tendons and ligaments in it that we really like to strengthen for injury prevention, for being able to pull really hard. And then more of the things that we think about endurance is going to be pretty local to your forearm muscles. So those are the things that we're going to be training with hangboarding is going to be the fingers and the forearms. And yeah, so let's dive in. First, I'm just going to start with some general strength and conditioning concepts so that we can just understand where we're coming from with the hangboard training, and then I'm going to dive into 3 different hangboard protocols. And I found a laser pointer that I'm going to be using. We normally use this to have our dogs chase the laser, but I'm going to be using it for the presentation today. All right, so I'm going to flip. Okay, so first what we're going to be talking about today is what's called the general adaptation syndrome, and this is just the way that our body responds to training. So on the left here we have performance level, and this is just kind of going out throughout time here. So the idea is you're starting at a certain performance level here. What you're going to do is you're going to introduce stress, which is what training is. It is a stressor. And then the way that your body responds to it is there's initially going to be this little dip in performance, but then you're going to build resistance to these stressors, and then your body's eventually going to overcompensate, and you're going to reach a new performance level. And the way to keep going is to continue to introduce that stress. This is where you might want to change some things up, which we'll talk about in a bit. But again, you'll still see that little dip in performance and then continuing to go up. And I do want to say, this is kind of like a zoom in on the day-to-day. You're going to have ups and downs day-to-day no matter what. So just keep that in mind. It's not always going to be so linear. But what we can see overall is the performance level after training is higher than where you started. These numbers correspond to different phases of the general adaptation system. So when we first get this dip in performance, this is called the alarm phase. And this is just where your body's like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is new. I don't know how to respond to this. I'm going to kind of, this is where you might feel really sore if you just start training. And it is important to make sure that everything is appropriately dosed, especially if you're newer to training. So definitely keep that in mind if you haven't done any sort of hangboard training before, and you're looking to start. So just know that it's going to take a second for your body to adapt. So we don't want to go too much too fast for sure. The second phase of the adaptation is going to be that resistance phase I was talking about. So your body's like, oh, okay, I understand what these stresses are now, and I can start to adapt. So this is where you're going to just start getting stronger. Your body, for hangboarding specific, your fingers are going to get more used to the stress that you're putting on them as you continue with your training. And then we'll eventually get to this phase 3, which is that super compensation phase. So this is where you surpass your previous level of performance and you're now at a new performance level. There is a phase 4, which is something we want to avoid, which is overtraining. And this is if, like I said, if you go too hard, too fast, it's not appropriately dosed, you're going to see a much more marked decrease in performance. So if you're dipping too far, you might be experiencing some overtraining. And that would be just not only feeling sore, but just feeling very, very fatigued. You don't seem to really recover from that. And it's for an extended period of time. So it's more than a couple days. It would be, something like 1 to 2 weeks. If you're still feeling that way, you might have just gone a little bit too hard. So we do want to make sure, start low and slow. There's nothing wrong with that. It's better to work up to where you need to be intensity-wise than to start too hard and then go into this overtraining mode. All right, so now that's just kind of the general principle of what training is. So next we're gonna move on to some charts here, and we're gonna walk through them together so it's not so overwhelming. But basically we're talking about what adaptations we want to elicit from our training. So there's many different training goals that you can have. So here in this column, one is going to be strength and power, one's going to be what's called hypertrophy, and one's going to be endurance. And the adaptations that we get from our training matters on what we're doing, how intense it is, how many sets we're doing, how much we're resting, all of these factors. So we're going to walk through those together here. All right, so in this first table, what I have is TUT means time under tension. So this is how long the event that you're performing is. So something like 0 to 6 seconds would be a really fast sprint. 6 to 30 seconds would be a longer sprint. I'm not good at running terms, but yeah, a 6 to 30 second effort. The next level up is going to be 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Next level up 2 to 3 minutes, and then greater than 3 minutes is that last step. And what you can see is based on how long of the duration of the event is, you're going to be using different energy systems. So we can also see that as the event duration gets longer, the intensity is also going to drop because there's just no way to maintain an extremely high level of intensity for an extended period of time. So just looking across here, my laser pointer is dying. I can use a pencil. So, if we look at this first column here, we can see 0 to 6 seconds, the intensity is going to be very high, and when you're going to use an energy system called the phosphagen system, we're not going to get too super into energy systems today. I do have a video that dives in a little bit deeper on energy system work on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. But basically the phosphagen system is what powers these very short high intensity events. So it's a lot of energy, but it runs out quick. So once you hit about this 6 to 30 second range, you're going to be using both the phosphagen as well as the glycolytic system, and that just is able to produce more energy, but it's just slower to get started. As we go through, we transition to the glycolysis and oxidative systems, and then the oxidative system is what's going to power you if you have a very long duration event, and that again just produces a lot of energy. It just takes some time to get started, and it's kind of like a slow and steady thing. It's not a big burst of energy like the phosphagen system in the beginning. So how do we relate that to our training? Well, like I said, we're looking, generally there's 3 different training goals of strength and power, hypertrophy, and endurance. And this is going to directly correlate with your time under tension or how long the event is. So strength and power, that's what we associate with that high intensity, short duration. This would be something like a 5 rep max if you're lifting weights. Or again, like kind of a sprint if you're doing power, like a big track and field event, the like vertical jump or something like that. Hypertrophy is going to be more of this muscle growth type phase where it's a longer duration. We're kind of in this glycolysis energy system now. And that's where you kind of get more of that pumped feeling. That's kind of what hypertrophy is associated with. So for climbers, some hypertrophy you might be familiar with would be something like your forearms. If you started climbing as an adult, or not quite as a kid, you might have seen that your forearms got bigger, and that's because the type of work that we do with climbing is kind of in this hypertrophy, power endurance type energy systems. And then the last one is endurance, and again, this is going to be more of this, greater than 3 minute type. Sorry, it cut me off for a second. This higher duration event, and so that's what we associate with those long durations. This is something like a multi-mile run. Endurance for climbers would be more in kind of that route climbing realm, or more like if you were on like a tread wall or something and you were just continuously climbing for a period of time. And so what we also want to look at, and this is what's important for looking at hangboard protocols, is not only are we looking at the duration of the work we're doing, but we also want to consider the rest that we're taking. So for strength and power adaptations, we're taking longer rests. We're going to be in this 2 to 5 minute rest range, because what happens is this phosphagen system takes a good amount of time to recover. So you kind of use all your energy from this system, and then you have to take that 2 to 5 minutes to try and recover, build that energy back up again so you can have another short and intense effort. For hypertrophy, we're kind of in a middle range of rest here, so it's going to be 30 seconds to 1.5 minutes here. And this is, again, if you're going for hypertrophy, you kind of want to maintain that pumped feeling, where you don't want to rest so long that it goes away. You still want to be kind of creating some fatigue and keeping that fatigue up. That being said, these types of protocols are pretty like energy expensive, so you definitely want to kind of watch your fatigue with those types of workouts. And then endurance, the rest time is going to be 30 seconds or less, so super short rests, and this contributes to just that lower intensity of the effort. So if you're only resting for 30 seconds, you're still going to be in this oxidative system and trying to go for that longer duration. So if we kind of take a peek over here, when we're comparing the amount of work to the amount of rest that you're taking, we can see that these vary quite a bit. So strength and power, you're going to be resting about 20 to 50 times longer than you're working. So again, really short efforts, really long rest, high intensity. Hypertrophy, you're going to be more in this 1:1 to 1:3 ratio. So you're either resting as long as you're working or resting about 3 times the amount that you're working, and these are just kind of ballpark numbers. But then the big thing is with endurance, we're more at this 2:1 to 6:1 ratio, where you are working double the amount of time that you're resting, or working up to 6 times the amount of time that you're resting. So these are just the important things to consider when we're looking at hangboard protocols, because it's all these same principles that we are using when we are hangboard training. And it doesn't have to get too much more complicated than that. I know there are a ton of different hangboard protocols out there. It can feel really overwhelming. You don't know which protocol to do. So just think, okay, what am I trying to accomplish here? Am I trying to get stronger? Am I trying to kind of get more of this pumped power endurance feeling? Or am I trying to get endurance? Strength and power in general is just a really good foundation baseline. If you don't really know what to do, you can't go wrong with training your strength and power, because it's kind of the base that everything else is built off of. This kind of hypertrophy power endurance protocol would be more relevant to a short bouldery route or a longer boulder, and then endurance is going to be those just longer durations of super long route, a multi-pitch route, that kind of thing. So we're going to look at hangboard protocols now. So the main two that we see a lot is this max hangs and repeaters protocol. Those are the ones that you'll probably see most often. They're both very popular, and they're both good protocols. So we're going to be comparing them based on intensity, duration. We're going to talk about the sets and the just work to rest ratios for these. So starting off with max hangs, the intensity is going to be that high intensity. We're about 80 to 90% of your max. And what that kind of means is if you haven't tested for a max hang, it's just going to be if you were at an effort level of 1 to 10, 10 being like you almost like couldn't do it, 1 being super, super easy, being in that 8 to 9 range of like it feeling challenging but doable is where you want to be. The duration for this, typically it's written for 10 seconds, but you might see variations that go down to 7 seconds. So again, in that shorter duration, you're only going to do one of those hangs before you then rest for 3 minutes. So if we're looking at the work to rest ratio, you're going to be resting, depending on if you're doing this 7 or 10 second hang, anywhere from 18 times to 26 times longer than you're working. So again, we just see that really big, difference between how short you're hanging and how long you're resting. So again, like you might see a bunch of different protocols out there. Just if you're looking for strength, looking for that really high, or I guess really low work to rest ratio where you're just resting quite a bit longer, because this allows you to really try really hard during these 7 to 10 seconds. You can keep it really intense, and you can do multiple sets at that intensity. Moving to repeaters, and we'll talk about those other categories in a second. Moving to repeaters, you're going to be around a 40 to 60% intensity. And this is if you were just hanging for 7 seconds, it would feel like a 4 to 6 out of 10 on the difficulty scale. What makes this protocol challenging is the amount of hanging that you're doing. So again, just going back to the duration of what you're doing. So the repeaters protocol calls for a 7-second hang, 3-second rest, and then you're going to do that 6 to 12 times. So 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off. 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off. If you do 6 hangs, that's going to be 1 minute total of doing this repeater protocol. If you do it 12 sets, you're going to be in more of that 2-minute range. And yeah, you might just see variance in different protocols, but the big thing is that between those sets, you're going to be resting 1 to 3 minutes. So you're already in a 2 to 1 work to rest ratio in the actual sets. So you're already resting half the time that you're working. But then you're stacking that on with some shorter rests in between your sets. So again, we're in this like 2 to 1 ratio or 1 to 1.5. So it's much shorter than, when you compare it to this max hangs protocol. Much less rest, much more work. So again, that's why we see this drop in intensity there. So, you would really look to use repeaters for this endurance protocol, just based on these work to rest ratios, the intensity that you're going to be able to do. And one thing we see is there's, this gap between the intensities here. You go from 40 to 60 with the repeaters all the way up to 80 to 90. So, there aren't a ton of protocols out there that are kind of the happy medium between the two. What I've seen a lot of is the same repeaters protocol, but adding weight to it, which, does make it more intense, but it is really difficult to try and get more of that power endurance workout when there is such little rest. It's hard to increase the intensity because of how much volume you're doing and how little rest you're getting. So one protocol that I really like, it's just called intermittent hangs. This is a Steve Bechtel protocol of Climb Strong, and he did something really clever here where he just switched the work to rest ratio of the hangs. So instead of hanging for 7 seconds, resting for 3, he just doubled the rest time as compared to the work time. So now you're hanging for 7 seconds, but then you're resting for 13. And we're going to a 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. So now you're resting double the time that you're hanging. So you're going to do 6 rounds of that, which is going to get you to that total of 2 minutes. And then when you are resting, so you do this 7-13 pattern continuously for 2 minutes. And then once that set is done, you're going to rest for that 2 minutes. So again, just comparatively, you're getting this 1-to-1 set to rest ratio, again, compared to the repeaters, which you get less rest, and then the max hangs where you're getting a lot more rest. So this is a really nice happy medium, and this is what I would consider more of a hypertrophy or power endurance type protocol. So the one thing you want to consider with any protocol is this total time under tension, which is what I've abbreviated as TUT. So in these protocols, max hangs, you're doing 3 to 5 total sets. Repeaters, you're doing 6 to 10, so quite a few more sets. And then with the intermittent hangs, you're back down to about this 3 to 5. And that, again, just goes to the intensity that you're hanging with and what adaptation you're trying to get. So the total time under tension in a max hangs protocol, you're hanging for 30 to 50 seconds if you're doing this 10-second protocol. When you compare that to the repeaters, so what I did here was I just took the 7 seconds that you're hanging, I multiplied it by 6 or 12 to see how much hang time you're actually getting. You're getting 252 to 420 seconds. So just keep in mind how big of a difference in volume that is. This is like 5 to like 12 times less than the endurance workout. And then if we look at the intermittent hangs, we see we're kind of, again, in that happy medium with a total time under tension of 126 to 210 seconds. So just keep in mind, with these types of protocols, the overall fatigue that it's going to generate. Like I said, max hangs are really excellent, just baseline maintenance. If you aren't trying to peak your endurance, these are just a really good go-to to just do year round, because really they don't take that long. If you're doing 3 sets with 10-second hangs and 3 minutes rest, that's like 10 minutes. It's really quick, it's easy, and you're going to maintain that adaptation of strength, which takes time to build, but it sticks around quite a bit. Whereas both power endurance and endurance, you're going to want to be intentional about when you peak these adaptations. These are quicker adaptations to come. Like if you've ever done a repeaters protocol, you might have noticed that, I feel like I have more endurance after only 2 or 3 sessions of doing repeaters. And that's because, like I said, this adaptation just comes a lot quicker. But that being said, it's hard to maintain it for a very long amount of time, especially with this kind of power endurance and endurance protocols. The idea is to generate fatigue and be able to endure that fatigue and keep going. So at a certain point, you're kind of going to go off the other side of the adaptation, where you accumulate so much fatigue that you might end up more in this kind of overtraining phase. So I generally recommend, if you were looking for your kind of steak and potatoes type of workout, which was one of the questions I got, this max hangs protocol is going to be really good. It's the foundation off of which these other adaptations are built. And then, if you're a boulder and you're trying a climb that's trying a boulder that's a few moves longer than you're used to, and you want to get a little bit more power endurance, you can train this for 2 to 3 weeks. You'll see that difference really quick. You'll be able to, peak that adaptation. climb the boulder you want to climb. But for these, you don't want to try to maintain that for any longer than 5 to 6 weeks, or you will get that accumulated fatigue. And then as far as endurance goes, it's kind of dependent on the individual. Again, just keep in mind like how much volume you're doing and how that affects your climbing, because climbing is also volume. So if you're doing a ton of laps on routes trying to get your endurance going and you're doing repeaters, again, just keep an eye on how your body's doing. Are you still, seeing this adaptation, or are you starting to see a good decrease in performance there? Okay, got a question. Any opinions on isometrics in place of max hangs? Yeah, I think as long as you're keeping these work to rest ratios and you're keeping the intensity in the right place, it's totally fine to use isometrics in place of max hangs, especially if you're limited in equipment. These could be a really good option because you don't need a bunch of weight or anything. But yeah, and you could really do it with any of these protocols. It's a little bit more, unless you have an actual gauge to measure, it might be a little bit just more based on how you feel, how intense you want to make it. But yeah, totally fine to use isometrics there. One other question I did get was different kinds of grips on the hangboard. I'm going to switch it to be my face again. All right, hi again. So yeah, the last question I got was about adding different grip types in with your hangboard protocol. And for that, I would say just make it as specific as necessary for the type of climbing that you do. For that, for example, I just moved from Colorado. Colorado is a ton of just crimping. So for me, I really didn't feel the need to do any other type of grip other than the half crimp, because it was super relevant to what I was doing outside. Now that I'm in the Southeast, I might want to incorporate some more open hand type grips because there's more slopers out here. But again, just keeping in mind how much volume you're adding to your hangboard workout. If you're doing repeaters and you're already starting at a base of 420 seconds and you want to add in another grip at that same protocol, you're doubling that amount of time, and that is a lot of time that you're hanging. So just keep that in mind. If you are adding in a grip, just see how your body's responding, see how your fingers are feeling, and just go slow and steady like with everything else. And again, with grip types, I know a lot of people in the Wyoming area where there's a lot of different pockets. That would be a situation where you would want to train, a good number of different grip types so that you're prepared for what you're going to encounter out on the rock. But again, for me in Colorado, is there much of a point of me, playing on these different pocket hangs? Not really. So just keep it relevant to what you're encountering. Another question, any specific warm-up recommended prior to hangboarding? It just depends on where you are. You definitely, of course, want to make sure that you are warmed up before you're trying to do max hangs, repeaters, any of that. Warm up to the level or the intensity that you're going to be hanging at. For example, you probably don't have to warm up as much for repeaters at that 40 to 60 intensity as you would for a max hang where you're adding a lot more weight. But if you're at the climbing gym, just climbing is a great warm-up, just getting blood to the fingers. If you are at home, you can, do some just jug hangs, do some general cardio just to get the blood flowing. And then you do want to do a more specific workout for the hangboard in either of those situations. So let's say I'm doing max hangs on a 20 millimeter edge and I'm adding 50 pounds to that hang. I'm going to want to start all the way at body weight, do a 10-second hang at body weight, and slowly add weight as I warm up. Trying to keep the warm up as specific to the workout as possible when you are on the hangboard. So again, for repeaters, I might just warm up by doing a couple of 7-3s, hangs on like a bigger edge than I am for my actual sets. Just keep it specific. thoughts on training full crimp in moderation. Yeah, again, train what you're going to encounter. If you're encountering full crimps outside and you aren't training it, it might be a lot more nerve-wracking, or you might end up getting hurt if your body's not prepared for that. So yeah, training full crimp, again, like you said, in moderation is perfectly fine. But if you're not really encountering full crimps outside, then like I don't know how many full crimps I'll encounter out here in Georgia in the southeast, so I might not train it. But if your project has full crimps, or you do just run into them a lot, then it is worth training in moderation. Yeah, thanks for all the questions, you all. Let me know if there are any more, but I will post a recording of this because I know that was a lot of information. So yeah, well, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, the recording of this will be up soon. Bye.